It's the Farmer to Farmer podcast, episode 144. And this is your host, Chris Blanchard. Marja Smets and Bo Varsano raise an intensive 3/4 of an acre of vegetables at Farragut Farm, located across a lot of water from Petersburg, Alaska. Selling vegetables for 8 years in what may well be the most remote and difficult to access vegetable farm in the country, Marja and Bo make a living moving their vegetables to market on a boat when the tide is high. We dig into the details of farm management when local amendments are the only real option, and when you get 120 inches of rain a year because you farm in a temperate rainforest. Bo and Marja provide details of the mobile high tunnel system in their high wind environment, dealing with Alaska wildlife, and farming off of the electrical grid. Marja and Bo also share how they maximize produce sales with visits to town on an irregular schedule, and how they are working to address food insecurity in Petersburg, Alaska. The Farmer to Farmer podcast is generously supported by BCS America. BCS two-wheel tractors are versatile, maneuverable in tight spaces, lightweight for less compaction, and easy to maintain and repair on the farm. Gear-driven and built to last for decades of dependable service. BCSAmerica.com. And by Local Food Marketplace, helping farms and food hubs around North America implement easy-to-use online ordering systems that integrate with a full management system for order packing, invoicing, and payment processing. Contact localfoodmarketplace.com to learn more. And by Vermont Compost Company, founded by organic crop growing professionals committed to meeting the need for high-quality compost and compost-based living soil mixes for certified organic plant production. VermontCompost.com. Marja Smets and Bo Varsano, welcome to the Farmer to Farmer podcast.
Thanks, Chris.
Hi, Chris. Thanks for having us.
I'd like to start off today by having you guys give us the lay of the land and I guess of the water up there on your farm on Frederick Sound.
Yeah, well, it's probably an unusual place. It is an unusual place to have a farm, but we are in Southeast Alaska, which is a pretty big area that is mostly water access. There's towns there, but there aren't road systems between the towns. So everything, people, freight, everything is moved by water. And I guess probably what's most unusual about our farm is our access issues. We think we're probably the most remote and difficult to access commercial farm in the country. And that might not be true, but we can't imagine anyone stupid enough to try and farm in a place that has worse access than ours. So that's what we base that on.
I wasn't going to say it, so I'm glad that you did.
But it's small. We're only right around a little less than 3/4 of an acre. And we're up a tidal slough, which is basically a creek that runs fresh water all the time and then high tide salt water. So the tide comes in, and that's our access. There are no roads anywhere near us. There's no roads in the bay. There's no roads connecting the town that we deliver to anywhere else. Yeah, it's quite remote.
How are you guys getting your produce to market from that 3/4 of an acre? Where are you going and how do you get it there?
We take it to Petersburg, which is the closest town. It's about a little less than 30 miles away by boat. And it's a town of about 3,000. That's our primary market. We also air freight some stuff to other towns around Southeast, but most of what we sell goes directly to Petersburg. And our access is kind of complicated to describe. We're up, like I said, on a tidal slough, but the tide doesn't come up that slough every day. So with the cycles of the tide, there's bigger cycles and smaller cycles of tides. And there's time periods of up to about a week or so that there is no access to our farm. So we have to time everything with the higher high tide cycles. And it's a multi-step process of moving the vegetables to a small boat. And then with a small boat at high tide, usually we have about a half an hour window, maybe less, depending on the size of the tide, where we can move stuff up and down that slough. And we take it down the slough to a bigger boat, and then the bigger boat takes it to town, And then it's pretty normal after that. We load it onto it. We've got a little box truck and we sell at a market in Petersburg. There's a small farmers market that actually is really just us as far as vegetables. So that's our primary marketing source. We also sell right in the bay to small tour boats, like charter boats that take people around Southeast Alaska because it's a really scenic area. And they will come in and pick the vegetables up right there. So we're selling every week, once a week, either to charter boats or delivering to Petersburg.
And just to clarify, they're quite small charter boats. They're just taking 6 to maybe 15 passenger, not like the huge cruise ships that you might think of coming up to Alaska.
Because those huge cruise ships they're not gonna fit where you guys are, right?
Realistically, they need deeper water. Our bay would be a very scary prospect for a giant cruise ship because we have miles and miles of mud flats for them to get stuck on. So they wouldn't want to come near us.
One of the obvious questions that I think of when you talk about a 3/4 of an acre farm in Southeast Alaska, in a place where there's no roads, in a place where you can't have a regular delivery schedule because the tides don't follow a strict 24-hour a day, 7-day a week cycle, is this working financially? I mean, I just want to kind of start there. Or is this just like something weird that's happening in Southeast Alaska and that makes it kind of cool? Or is it actually something where you guys are making the living that you want to make at it?
Yeah, we are making the living that we want to make at it. I think it has a lot to do with that we also live a homesteading life. So we provide a lot of our own needs for ourselves. You know, we're creating our own energy. We're obviously growing all our own food. We heat with wood that we cut in our bay. So we don't have a lot of the expenses maybe that you'd have if you were living in a town down in the lower 48 or even rurally. This last year, I just finished our numbers and we grossed, for our 3/4 of an acre, we grossed just over 60,000, 61,000. And our costs are fairly low that's enough for us to get by. We don't have any kids. It's just the two of us. And it's plenty of a living for us. We live what we consider to be a very rich life and have all that we need. And yeah, it works for sure.
And then I guess the other question is why? I mean, Bo, you said it was kind of stupid to do what you guys are doing, but why? I mean, how did Farragut Farm come about, and why not just go and get yourself a piece of land that's actually a little bit easier to work with?
Well, we always hear people on your podcast who are super intentional about how they started their farming careers, and they knew exactly what they wanted to do and pursued it with a really focused and step by step, and they knew what they wanted and that's what they were going for. That didn't happen for us. Basically, we both had jobs that, while they worked for us pretty well, they took us away from home. You can't get a job in Farragut Bay. There's no one hiring.
Other than Farragut Farm.
There's no one hiring because there's no one there, right?
There's one other couple that lives there year-round. Otherwise, we're the only residents. There's some recreational cabins there, but those two couples, us and the other couple, are the only residents. What you would consider a resident of Farragut Bay. So yeah, we couldn't get work there. I worked as a commercial fisherman, which you're gone for blocks of time. And Marja was working in the tourist industry as a kayak guide and on small charter boats. But both of those careers brought us away from home a lot. And, we wouldn't see each other as much. And mostly we liked staying home. It's a really beautiful place. We really like the homestead lifestyle and are very happy to spend our full time in this one bay doing what we do to survive. And it was Marja's idea. I'm going to blame her.
I get all the blame, yeah.
To try growing vegetables. And we'd always had a big garden, and we always brought our excess produce to town and gave it away to friends. So we just basically just expanded our garden and went from there. And it evolved in a very scattered, haphazard way into what now is kind of a pretty efficient. I mean, our layout's a little not ideal because of the way we developed. We just sort of got whatever greenhouse we could find until we figured out that maybe they should all match and all our plots should be laid out the same way. And we're slowly bringing it around into what would be more like an efficient model for a small farm our size.
Tell me about how your farm is set up, because when I think about climates conducive to farming, well, I mean, Southeast Alaska is like, I mean, you guys have rain there. I mean, that makes Seattle and Bellingham, Washington look like dry places. How do you guys make that work in that extreme northern climate that's so darn wet?
Yeah, you're definitely right. People say that Seattle's rainy, but I think they get something like an average of 30, correct me if I'm wrong, around the 30 inches of rain a year, and we get around 120 inches of rain. So it's a temperate rainforest up here. It is raining all the time, every season. It doesn't matter. Oftentimes our summer weather is 50, 55 degrees and raining. That's very typical. So we do have to deal with excess moisture, and we've gone about tackling that challenge in a number of different ways. I mean, to begin with, we first sited all our plots just on the highest pieces of our land to try to seek the best drainage without having to do, we didn't have a big tractor to move earth around and make serious drainage canals. So we just tried to work with what we had. And we learned pretty quickly on that growing under cover is super helpful here. Like Bo said in the beginning, we picked up a couple high tunnels used and then figured out the NRCS program, and since then have applied for 3 NRCS tunnels. And altogether now, with one of the greenhouses we had before we started farming, we've got 7 high tunnels. Actually, about 25% of our land at any given time is under cover. A lot of those high tunnels are movable, so there's the capacity to have more of our land under cover, but just at any given moment, about 25% is covered. And that's been huge for us as far as quality and season extension. Our crops definitely get rained out here, so we need to do what we can to get an umbrella over them as much as possible. I'd say also just crop selection, figuring out which varieties can tolerate that much moisture and the cool temperatures. We obviously aren't growing eggplants or peppers, even tomatoes commercially. We do for ourselves, but any of those heat-loving crops we just can't pull off in an efficient manner up here. So we stick with cool weather-loving crops, but that still gives us good variety. We grow 30 to 40 different varieties of crops altogether.
Yeah, I guess we've developed or been forced into a certain method, some of that, that we've come up with, and some of it just from reading all the good books and talking to people. But we do a pretty standard 30-inch raised bed and, very little mechanical tools. We have an electric tiller. We pretty much don't have anything that runs on gasoline besides our outboard motors to move, the boats around. But we can't really cultivate. Like cultivating for weeds doesn't really work for us. So that has been a challenge, figuring out different methods of weed suppression without being able to cultivate.
Why can't you cultivate?
Well, if it turns out if you leave a weed on the ground in Southeast Alaska, it doesn't really care that you've pulled it out and its roots are in the air. It just keeps growing.
It will reroot. It will find a way to reroot instantly.
Pretty much instantly. If you cultivate, you suppress the weeds for about 48 hours, and then they're right back where they were. So we have to actually either suppress them with some kind of mulch or, covering. We have a bunch of tarps that we use. They're not silage tarps, but they're, what do you call that stuff? It's
Typar, right?
Yeah, it's like a road-based woven material. It's water permeable. So we use a lot of that between crops to keep the weeds down. And we do a lot of hand weeding, more than we want to, but we haven't found another solution as far as removing weeds that are already there in a crop that we can't just cover with something else. And you can't you can't even hand weed and pull them out and leave them on the ground. They have to be removed and we compost them or something. But if you don't remove them from the bed, they reroot immediately. So we can't predictably till in any season. Generally, May is a little bit drier, and sometimes we can get in there in the spring and rototill or cultivate or prepare the soil in that way, but not predictably at all. And we really are forced to pretty much take advantage of any dry spell to run around and till whatever is tillable and needs it. And otherwise, we just do completely a no-till. You know, we're surface tilling to prepare beds, but our deep soil working is all done with broad forks and stuff like that.
And you guys just broad fork in the wet soils then to loosen things up, and that doesn't damage things too much?
Not at all. It actually works quite well. Yeah, you can broad fork in the pouring rain here, and it really doesn't. You know, if you're careful, we definitely don't. I know some people like just stand on their beds when they're broad forking. We don't, because we would get compaction just from the weight.
Human traffic.
Yeah, human traffic. It's muddy enough that is always pretty much a problem.
Now, you guys have a pretty heavy clay soil there, right? I think that's kind of typical of Southeast Alaska, right?
Actually, soil is pretty unusual in Southeast Alaska. In general, there's not a history of agriculture in this part of Alaska. Up north, in the Matanuska Valley around Palmer, there definitely has been agriculture for a long time. But here in Southeast, it's really a rocky island, kind of new geologic area where any soils are very thin. They're covered with forests. Having any sort of soil is pretty unique here. So we are lucky in that where our farm is located is in a river delta, the Farragut River. So we actually do have existing soil to work with, but we do a lot of amending with local ingredients, seaweed, beach grasses, fish, crab, different seafood waste to work on lightening and amending that soil.
Our soils are clay-based, and like Marja said, soil is atypical here, but it is, we do have actually pretty excellent soil, like even just testing it in its raw state without anything ever have been being done to it. I mean, the ground that we're cultivating, it's never even had the grass mowed off it. It was homesteaded originally, but it is new land. It's hard to even encounter something quite like that, I think, in the lower 48, because there never has been anything done to it before. And just in its natural state, it's kind of a meadow with pretty intense, thick, lush growth. And it's been like that for at least hundreds of years. It's cycling from tide flats into meadows. So there has been quite a bit of organic matter built up in it. And when we have tested it just as raw soil, it's pretty darn good. It's got a lot of clay, but otherwise you can really work with it quite easily. Like we can pretty much just stir it up and grow in it for a couple of years without having to do anything.
For fertility then, I mean, you mentioned these products that you're using. I say products, but they're not really products, are they?
Products of the sea.
Yeah.
But yeah, not products that we buy commercially. We don't really buy, bags of different amendments or bags of compost. I mean, part of that is just the logistics of moving things to and from our farm is complicated enough. And if we're going to be buying in large amounts of amendments, that just creates another piece of the puzzle. But mostly it has to do with just our interest in keeping our farm local and keeping all of our amendments local. And we feel like we're very fortunate to live right by the sea, and the sea is very productive, and almost everything the soil needs actually is produced in different forms by the sea. So we just have had a big interest in learning about that and understanding more about what's available and how we can use it to feed our soil better. And that's actually something we've been working on with soil testing in amendment testing, figuring out what the character is of our local seaweed, and trying to disperse that information eventually to growers around our region, because there's a lot of people who historically have used seaweed in their gardens or other sea-based products, but nobody really knows what's in there and what's it doing to their soil. So we are working towards getting a more concrete knowledge of what the makeup is and what it's doing to our soil as we every year get tests done and analyze how things are changing.
So it's not just a matter of grabbing some of whatever's available. It's going out and making intentional choices about, well, we need this nutrient, so let's add more seaweed. We need that nutrient, so let's get some shell sand or some fish waste.
Yeah, definitely. It's taken some research to figure out, when we see that our soils are lacking in phosphorus, well, what around here do we have that's high in phosphorus that we could use, on a commercial level? So it's been fun. It's kind of been a treasure hunt to figure out, well, what do we have? What can we use to fill those needs that our soil is showing?
I would say that that's what we're working towards. Up until probably just 3 or 4 years ago, we pretty much were like, yeah, this seaweed looks great. It's got lots of dead crabs in it, and it's got some grass, it's got some sand fleas, it's got seaweed. It must be good. Let's just put a ton on there. And we have run into a few problems doing that. So we are getting a lot more selective and scientific, and really, well, scientific might be a stretch, but just trying to get a better handle on it so we can do a more accurate, efficient, and appropriate use of the amendments that are just right outside our door, basically.
So things like the seaweed and the fish waste, are you just putting those right on the growing beds, or are these going through a composting process first?
It's a little of both. We more and more we're composting everything before we put it on. Ironically, you think of seaweed as just being something that comes directly out of the ocean, but basically what we're getting is what blows up onto the beach in big windrows. So it's basically all dead stuff. It's stuff that's been washed up in storms and is no longer attached and in the sea. And it's a mixture of all kinds of things. It's not just seaweed.
For years and years, we would put that seaweed directly onto the garden, but we noticed that we were introducing a lot of weed pressure because there was, weed seed that had floated in with the seaweed and gotten mixed in along with other sticks or maybe some rocks and other things that we don't want to continue to import into our nice beds that we're trying to keep clean of those things. So by composting all of that before we put it onto the beds, we're able to kill those weed seeds and not continue to introduce more weed pressure, even though all we're trying to do is amend it with the seaweed.
That being said, though, if we get nice clean seaweed that's mostly just seaweed, we do put it directly on the beds, especially this time of year in the fall, to carry the beds through the winter with coverage on them. We pretty much cover everything to carry it through the winter in some form or another. Like either it has a high tunnel over it, or it'll have seaweed covering it, or it'll have, our tarps over it, or we do a lot of cover cropping too, and just let that run through the winter. But we're covering everything to carry it through the winter, just because we get so much rain through the winter. We would have, things just leach. Anything that's not attached to the exchange capacity is going to leach through the soil and be gone by spring. So we really have to take really good care of our soil through the winter.
Yeah, otherwise just major nutrient loss. There's just so much rain, flushes right out.
Are you guys using cover crops in your climate as well?
Yeah, we're on this schedule now where all our beds are usually getting cropped at least twice. Some things only once, but oftentimes it's 2 or 3 or sometimes even 4 times. And at the end of their cropping cycle, if they're done before a certain date, we cover crop them. And what we're looking for is a really advanced stage of growth that will carry the bed through the winter with quite a bit of coverage that winter kills and is still there in the spring, and we get like a pretty nice thick mulch layer if everything's worked out right, and we transplant directly into that if it's a bed to be transplanted, or we pull it off into the walkways, and surface till the beds and direct seed into those. So basically any bed that's done with its cropping by about August 15th, we're cover cropping, usually with my favorite thing. We still experiment with a bunch of other things, but my favorite thing has just been good old oats and vetch or oats and winter peas. And we're trying to get those to the stage where the oats are actually pretty, have a pretty substantial carbony stalk that winter kills and makes that nice durable mulch for the next season.
Right, because if you seed it too late, you end up with it's basically like lawn grass almost. There's just no substance to it.
Yeah, in our climate, it will just break down and be gone by February or March, or even sooner. There'll be nothing left if it hasn't created that carbonaceous. What would be the word for that?
Carbonaceous.
That thick stem.
Yeah. When you say it would break down by February, I think you guys. I think Alaska. I'm thinking 57 degrees of latitude. I'm going like it must be snowy and really cold up there in the wintertime. But you talk about things breaking down. Maybe you guys are dealing with some different climate realities than what I'm thinking you are.
Yeah, I think oftentimes, you think of Alaska, you think of no sunlight through the winter, lots and lots of snow. But that's generally more the interior part of the state. The state is huge. It covers lots and lots of different ecoclimates, and where we are, it's very coastal. So we don't get the feet and feet of snow. And we actually do have some sunlight through the wintertime. Generally in the darkest part of the year, the sun rises about 9 or 10 in the morning, and then it goes down about 2 or 3 in the afternoon. So we're not completely in the dark. And some winters, we really don't get much snow. Some winters we do. We'll get a foot or two, or it'll come and go throughout the wintertime. But sometimes it's just rainy and 32 degrees. Sometimes it warms up into the 40s. Because it's so coastal, that maritime influence is really strong. And so we don't get the deep snow, the dark winters that you might think of with interior Alaska. If you look on a map, Southeast Alaska is basically coastal Canada. We should be part of Canada, but somehow the U.S. got it. So it's very, very coastal, maritime climate.
So to pivot back to your actual production system, then the beds where you're sowing these cover crops, of course, the beds where you're sowing the crops, I'm assuming are raised beds. But when I say raised beds, sometimes that means something different than what you guys might be doing. Are you guys raising your beds the same way that, say, JM40A might be doing, or are you doing something that's more extreme with some more structure to the sides?
Well, it's kind of evolved over the years. We started from a home garden, so we actually started with wooden sided raised beds that were our garden, and those are taller. They might be 14 inches deep or something. But we have evolved into something that really is very much like what JM40A is doing, where it's just an 8-inch raised bed with we do 14-inch walkways. They're pretty narrow, maybe narrower than he does. I don't remember. But anyway, the raised portion of the bed is only 8 inches deep. And it is a struggle to keep things from getting saturated and waterlogged to the point where, all your microbial activity stops and there's no nitrogen being created and nutrients are just leaching. And it's I don't know what to say. It's a struggle. And there's times when our farm just comes to a grinding halt in the middle of the growing season and nothing is doing anything besides getting more and more beaten by rain, and slugs are coming out everywhere and mold is growing on all the cucumbers and we're just tearing our hair out. But as soon as we get any kind of sunny weather, because we have really long sunny days, things are really long days where the sun, whether it's out or not, is, there's light for in the middle of the summer for, 18 hours a day or something. We can get really rapid growth, and our production just picks up in those time periods.
We should explain that in the summertime, it gets light around 3 in the morning and gets dark around 11 at night. And even when it's dark, it's not really dark. It's kind of just a twilight time. So that's what he means by 18 hours of sunlight.
Yeah. So I don't know what to say besides it is a problem, and it's part of what makes it challenging. And more, with our rolling high tunnels, we use them as umbrellas as much as anything. And the crops that really need that kind of coverage, we'll keep a tunnel over kale for a long time. We gave up growing broccoli because it can't take the amount of moisture. I mean, you could grow it for yourself, but commercially it just doesn't work out. So it's been a combination of finding, like Marja said before, varieties that work, specific crops that work, making our drainage as good as it possibly can be, working on having lots of nutrition so that you have, even when things are getting leached out, there's more coming from organic matter breaking down, lots of compost.
Also working on rotations, like we choose to cover our garlic over the winter time with our high tunnels, and then we set the rotation up within the track so that it gets rolled off of the garlic around February, March, and onto an early season plot for radishes and early kales and other spring crops. But then that it's planned to be rolled back over the garlic for the last month of the garlic's growing, because we need that to dry it out so that it can get where it needs to be. If we left it out, we have problems growing garlic outside in the summertime because it gets too moldy. So just thinking ahead and planning our rotations so that the high tunnel is where it needs to be at the right time of year for that crop has helped a lot.
Which I guess when you say planning those rotations and talking about the challenges that you've run into, how long have you guys been at this commercial vegetable growing enterprise?
How long have we been at it, or how long does it feel like we've been at it?
Like Bo said, we had a big home garden before we kind of decided to quit our day jobs and try to make a living off of farming. And so it was a slow transition in. Around 2010 was the first year that rather than giving away vegetables, we started to sell them. That's the year that the market got started in the little town of Petersburg. And so we were really small scale for those first 2-3 years, growing a little bit each year, but I would say we probably didn't really amp up our game until about 2014-ish, more or less. So we're still very new to it and definitely learning tons every year. And, that's part of why we're doing it. We both love the challenge and trying to find ways to make this work on our crazy little piece of land that's not really geared for it has been challenging and interesting and fun, and provided lots of opportunities for us to just learn about so many different things, whether it's soil biology, chemistry, business skills. Neither of us had ever run a business on our own either. We are still infants in the farming world, but we definitely feel like we've learned a lot in the last, I guess altogether, this was our 8th season, if you count 2010 as our first year selling.
The high tunnels seem like a really important part of your operation. Are all of those the mobile rolling high tunnels that you were just describing using in your garlic rotation?
Not all of them, but I think we have 4
rollers,
4 rolling high tunnels, and then 3 other greenhouses that don't move. We use the ones that don't move for some pretty specific things. Pretty much most things are grown in the rolling ones.
Yeah, our stationary tunnels are used for either, there are starts house. One of them has a wood stove in it, so that's what we use for growing all our starts. And then another one, we have raised, like waist high raised beds that we've created, and we do all our mixed baby greens production in there. so it's easier to work on and
out of the rain.
Out of the rain. Yeah.
The rolling high tunnels, are those something that you bought off the shelf, or is that something that you've modified tunnels that you bought that were designed to be stationary?
A little of both. The first couple that we made, we modified to roll, and then we started buying when we started getting NRCS tunnels. We bought them, with already set up to roll. We have done a lot of work figuring out how to make them more efficient with our low person power, to make them easy to move. And that's something that we've really, I think, done some interesting things with. Just details, but configurational details that make them easier to use and easier to roll, which is pretty crucial for us because we're at the point where we're rolling them off and onto crops just to cover them through rain events or to roll them off something that might need to be watered. So we don't hesitate to roll a high tunnel. Like me and Marja can move any one of our rolling high tunnels in a matter of like 10 or 15 minutes and re-anchor it and have it all, from one position to another in 10 or 15 minutes. So yeah, that's been a big, interesting project, just figuring out ways to have them automatically vent and easy to roll and roll. Like when we're rolling over the garlic here, we grow porcelains, which get to be 6 feet tall when we're rolling over them in the period of time where we want them covered before harvest. So we figured out ways to, have the bays and on the ends open real high to roll over tall crops. And I could talk about high tunnels, rolling high tunnels for quite a while, Chris.
Well, I mean, let's talk about those a little bit because you're in a very windy climate and you guys do have a really limited labor force. It's not like you can just call up the neighbors and say, let's get 6 people over here to push this high tunnel. So you said that you've done some things to make them easier to roll. Like what sorts of modifications have you done to make that work?
So we have all rim alls as far as the ones that we've bought as rollers already. And they have a wheel that is designed to roll on a pipe. And usually people just lay the pipe on the ground, which doesn't really work in our situation because our ground, while it's pretty flat, it's not perfectly level. And we really don't have the means to level it to the point where you would be able to easily roll a high tunnel on a piece of pipe that's laid on the ground. So we take a lot of time to make a foundation basically for the track. And it's pretty simple. You just drive pipe into the ground that's in a perfectly straight line as posts for the wheel track to sit on. So you drive those in so they're level and in a straight line, and then you bolt the track to those. So you have a fixed track that doesn't move at all and that's perfectly level and perfectly straight, or, as perfect as farmers make anything. And it turns out that makes it quite a bit easier to roll. If you don't have any dips and you're not flexing the tunnel, trying to get it to go over little bends and rises, and it really makes it much easier to roll. That pretty much takes care of that part. And then for the end walls, we make like basically roll up end walls that can roll up about 6 feet tall. It's pretty simple to do. It's really fast. We have some with hinged doors, which is more standard, and they're really a pain. And they don't fold up very high, and for us, it does not work very well. This roll-up system is really quick, gets really high. You can use it for ventilation really well. We put ridge vents in all of our tunnels that are controlled by the wax cylinders, so they automatically open and close as need be. That's helped a lot with ventilation. We also put access doors. We have an access door on the side wall, not the end wall, of our tunnels that slide. And that has been really good too. When you in the wintertime or, the shoulder seasons, when you want to keep the tunnel closed up, you don't want to open this giant and roll up end wall. You can access the tunnel through these sidewall sliding doors. And we have one at each end, which makes it really easy for us to take, we cover inside the high tunnels, we cover everything with big sheets of row cover. We don't cover each bed with an individual piece of row cover. The whole tunnel gets covered with one big piece. So we can walk in there. One person can be on one end of the row cover and the other person can be on the other. You walk just down the end wall sides of the greenhouse, grab the row cover and pull the whole thing over if you need frost protection or whatever to work on it. And then you walk right out those sidewall sliding doors. Just a really easy way and efficient way to access it.
And you must have a pretty quick and easy way to anchor and unanchor the houses too, if you're moving them that often and if it's only taking you 15 minutes or a half an hour to get that job done.
I would say literally 10 minutes, 15 to 10 minutes. It's really quick. Definitely not a half an hour.
Yeah, 10 minutes from popping the anchors, the whole process, undoing the anchors, rolling it, redoing it. It's really 10 minutes.
But you should tell me about your anchors.
It's pretty simple. I mean, it's nothing too complicated, but we make earth augers and we put permanently mounted earth augers about every 20 feet. That seems to be, after having high tunnels blow off the tracks a couple of times, because we didn't have enough of these anchors in. Every 20 feet seems to do it. And we get really, really strong winds. We can get, it's quite common to get 50, 60, 70, 80. In the wintertime, we've had up to 90 mile an hour winds, and it seems to hold them just fine if you have one of these earth augers. We go about 4 feet deep. It would depend on your soil, how deep you would need to drive them. But they're every 20 feet throughout the whole track system. So we're never moving anchors or anything. And we use 10,000 pound test ratchet straps, which you can get pretty cheaply. You can buy them in any number of places online for about $12 each. And those travel with the tunnel. So every 20 feet, you're undoing one of these ratchet straps, which takes seconds. And then you just clip it up onto the tunnel. So it travels with the tunnel to the next position. And then there's an earth auger right there, right where it needs to be in the next position for the ratchet strap. And you just crank it down again and walk down the length of the tunnel and reinstall those straps. So it goes really quickly.
Yeah, it's pretty slick.
I love that. I'm remembering my experience with, turnbuckles and aircraft cable for anchoring to those earth anchors. And I'm thinking, man, those ratchet straps, I wish I'd thought of that.
They're pretty slick. They make things very fast, for sure.
So, you guys are farming, not even just like on the edge of the wild, but you're farming in the wild. And I grew up in Seattle. I know how big the slugs get there. But, how are you guys dealing with the wild creatures? What kind of creatures are you dealing with? And then how do you keep them out of your gardens?
Well, we have slugs, but I don't think they're any wilder than slugs anywhere else.
Slugs are slugs across the world.
And they are one of our major pests. Believe it or not, probably the second worst enemy to our farm is the evil robin. And we get flocks of them, and I think we have created it. It's like our farm's a worm factory, and it's the only place around that has bare soil. Everything else is completely covered with vegetation. So it's easy pickings, and we get big flocks of robins that just come in and build nests all over the place and raise their babies, and they just get in there and they will rip apart any seed bed, pull up all the plants. They pull up our cucumber plants. We lost half of our cucumbers this spring to a bunch of robins that were able to sneak into one of the high tunnels. Dealing with them has been a big challenge. We basically cover anything that is delicate, any seed bed, any transplant that's small is covered with either row cover or bird netting, and it's a pain in the butt.
Yeah, but necessary.
Yeah, we wish we didn't have to do that, but we have to. So besides that, bigger animals that people think of more when they think of Alaska, maybe, we have moose, which that can be pretty interesting. Sometimes we chase them, sometimes they chase us. But generally, the moose there are more curious. They haven't really clued into our garden as a food source, and it's a pretty transient population. So they'll come through and they'll be curious, and they'll just kind of stomp through everything and eat a few things and cause a lot of damage, but they don't come back like night after night. And if we chase them out and keep them away, it's usually not that big a deal. We do have an electric fence, a very simple electric fence that goes around the entire farm that helps to keep them out. When they want to come in, they just break it down. But
I would kind of assume that when you're a moose, you get to go where you want to go.
You get to go where you want to go.
You sure do. You get to do whatever you want to do. They are not afraid of much.
And it's a big area for black bears. We don't really have any of the brown bears or grizzly bears, but we see bears on a daily basis, and they walk through the farm. Generally, they don't harm anything, and we've come to a truce with them. They don't bother us. We don't bother them. So I wouldn't say they're a problem at all. It's a problem for our interns more than anything. They have to walk to a cabin that's probably a 5-minute walk away. And depending on the intern and their comfort level with that kind of thing, it
can be a scary experience.
Yeah,
there could be a certain sphincter factor to that. Yeah.
Exactly.
We haven't lost one yet, though. So
no, we give them bear spray and they're okay.
So you said interns. Just real quick, tell me about that, because we've talked about how you don't have a lot of help on the farm, but do you normally have folks living there with you over the summer?
Well, for the last 3 years, we've had intern/workers, stipend worker interns. And we have a friend in the Bay who lived there for a while, a family that lived there for a while and then moved on, and they still have a cabin in the Bay that they're letting us use. So we use that as intern housing. The last 3 years we've had interns. And it's a little tricky. Like, we're in a situation that's probably a little harder for most people to deal with. It's really isolated. There's no social interaction besides me and Marja, which maybe gets a little bit old sometimes. So we've kind of come up with a solution of keeping the stays with us relatively short. We try and do a month or 6 weeks. And this last year, we rotated with another small farm that's up in Haines, a town about a couple 100 miles away. And we basically flip-flopped interns with them. So that our intern stayed with us for a month, their intern at the same time was with them, and then they switched places. Yeah, so that's been making it bearable for our interns for a full season. We've kind of given up on that because it's too much. Everything's too new. There's too many bears, too much isolation. The trips to town are too hard.
I think sometimes people have the idea that they would love to live in solitude and get away from it all. But then when reality hits and you're alone and there's no stores to go to and no restaurants and no movies, it's a hard reality for most people. So keeping the stay short has worked really well. Then people have fun, and when they're about ready to get tired of it, then they move on and try something new.
Yeah, we keep it short and sweet.
And I have to say, when the boss says things like "make it bearable," I mean,
yeah. We would love to be able to, our ideal would be to hire someone, but it's really not practical. I mean, you cannot commute between Petersburg and Farragut Bay, and we can't really afford to pay someone what we would have to make it worth their while to actually live in Farragut Bay and work for us for a season. So, everything's hand labor. So we need help, or it's really nice to have help, but we can't really access a labor pool. So that so far has worked pretty well for us, the intern thing. We'll see where it goes in the future.
With that, we're going to stop here, take a quick break, get a word from a couple of sponsors, and then we will be right back with Marja Smets and Bo Varsano from Farragut Farm up in Frederick Sound in Southeast Alaska. Perennial support for the Farmer to Farmer podcast is provided by BCS America. BCS two-wheel tractors are often mistaken for just a rototiller, but it is truly a superior piece of farming equipment. Engineered and built in Italy, where small farms are a way of life, BCS tractors are built to standards of quality and durability expected of real agricultural equipment, the kind of dependability that every farm needs. I have worked with BCS tractors for over 24 years, and I wouldn't consider anything else for my small tractor needs. And I am not the only fan. More than 1.5 million people in 50 countries have discovered the advantages of owning Europe's most popular two-wheel tractor. And these really are small tractors, with the kind of features found on their four-wheel cousins and a wide array of equipment: power harrows and rotary plows, flail mowers and snow throwers, sickle bar mowers and chippers, log splitters, and more. Check out bcsamerica.com to see photos and videos of BCS in action. bcsamerica.com. Support's also provided by Local Food Marketplace. Are you trying to scale up without the right systems? Instead of juggling email and text orders, spreadsheets for harvest packing and delivery, and a separate invoicing system, Local Food Marketplace's software platform will help your farm automate these tasks and decrease errors with its fully integrated system for online orders, inventory management, order packing, invoicing, and payment processing. Easily configure the system for managing multiple sales channels, customer types, price levels, and delivery routes. The platform also offers lot number traceability and an option to collaboratively sell products with other producers. Contact them via their website at localfoodmarketplace.com to schedule a free consultation on how Local Food Marketplace can help you efficiently manage customer orders from packhouse to your customer's doorstep. All right, and we're back with Marja Smets and Bo Varsano from Farragut Farm up in Alaska. Well, up in Southeast Alaska, so it's not, as you were explaining, not quite like being in Fairbanks, but it's
That's
definitely
right.
not quite like being in Washington or Wisconsin either. So
Somewhere in between.
Yeah, people from Fairbanks don't think that Southeast Alaska really is truly Alaska. We're a suburb of Seattle.
Suburbs of Seattle, but a little bit harder to get to than most of the
Yeah, the
Seattle
commute's pretty
suburbs,
long.
right? So I wanted to go back and dig in a little deeper about how you guys are actually going through the process of getting things to market. I mean, we talked about how it was so dependent on the tide, so that must right there have a huge influence on how you guys are managing your harvest schedule and your post-harvest handling.
Yeah, definitely. You know, it all starts around this time of year, is when the tide schedule gets published for the next year. So around November, December, I start taking a look at those tide books and figuring out which days we're actually going to be able to have enough water to float our veggies off the farm and down to our bigger boat and get to town. So I do spend a lot of time working through scheduling, getting our sell dates set up in advance, and from there work back towards setting our planting dates. We sell in town once every other week from early May through mid-September. And again, it depends on the tide. Sometimes we have to push it in one direction or the other. But we're shooting for about once every other week. And then on the opposite weeks of that, we generally have when our small cruise ships come in and when we're selling right in the bay. So we do generally do one big harvest every week. And the way that looks in the summertime, just kind of the nitty gritty is it takes us about 2 days on average, depending on if it's just us or if we've got help, to do our harvest, say for a Petersburg market. And then we, at the high tide, whether that's at 2 p.m. or sometimes 2 a.m, we load, we use carts, these big rolling carts that Bo has designed to move all the vegetables that we store in coolers. We move all those coolers to a little 16-foot skiff that we have and load it all up onto the skiff. And then we float that skiff out the slough, which is about a half mile.
It's a half mile.
Half mile. And then from the skiff, we manually load all those coolers onto our sailboat. We have a 26-foot catamaran, and so all the coolers get put in the floats, and we've made a sort of wooden carrying rack system on top. A bunch get loaded up there. Everything goes onto the sailboat, and then we go to town on that boat, and it takes us about 4 to 5 hours on that boat to reach Petersburg, depending on the weather and depending on how heavy our load is. And then from there, we're able to load all the coolers into a box truck that we have, and then the box truck goes to market where we set up our stand. But yeah, it's very tidally dependent. Obviously, we're not going to be carrying coolers full of vegetables on our backs out to the water. So we need to make sure that we've set our dates up ahead of time to work with those high tides that give us enough water to float out.
Yeah, just to add, like there is a tide schedule, but gosh, it's kind of hard to explain, but we are right above sea level. Like our entire farm is probably an extreme high tide is lapping at the edges of everything. The garden beds, our house, everything. We're right above high tide, and everything is really flat, including the slough. There's not much gradient. So 6 inches one way or another of tide, of tidal height, makes a huge difference. And we are forced to ride the edge of what's possible all the time, like as far as floating things up and down our slough. We have, our skiff has a flat bottom, so it doesn't take very much water. And we have to take multiple trips in order to, the skiff won't hold enough to just do it all in one trip. But believe it or not, we're looking at the tidal height, and then on a day when it's a marginal high tide, we're also looking at the barometric pressure to figure out which tide we're going to have to use to have enough water to get the vegetables out. Because if it's a high pressure day, like a sunny day, the tide is going to be significantly smaller, and smaller enough that we might not be able to take all these vegetables that we've waited 2 weeks to harvest and just spent a bunch of time harvesting. It just might not be big enough, and it's not possible to carry them out. There's no other way to get them out. So it can be nail biting.
Stressful.
Yeah, at times, when the tide is just barely big enough, and then you get a high pressure that comes in, and it's like, we can actually be able to move all these vegetables. But most of the time, with planning, like Marja said, it's pretty predictable, and we may have to get up in the middle of the night or whatever, but we're going to be able to get them out.
When you're taking coolers of produce out, how many coolers are you taking to town at a time?
Oh, let's see if I can figure that. Of course, we have just a hodgepodge of coolers because as we started small and we were cheap and didn't have a lot of money, and we'd buy used coolers off of people of all different sizes and shapes. So we don't have like a standard fleet.
I think maybe the more accurate way to get an idea of the quantity of, I think you're getting like quantity of produce.
Yes.
Yeah. We're loading the boat with, including cooler weight and everything else, anywhere from, I would say, 1,000 to 3,000 pounds of produce and coolers per trip to town.
So no small amount of produce.
No,
there's a lot of food.
We produce quite a bit of food. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
We're professional schleppers, Chris.
Yeah,
we spend a lot of time moving things.
I do think there's an argument to be made that farming and market gardening, maybe even more so than a lot of other farming, is all about materials handling. But you guys have you've really taken that and leveled it up.
Yeah, we've made it as tricky as possible. That's for sure. But we've gotten a lot better at it, and we've found some more efficient ways to go about it. So it gets easier and easier every year. And in fact, Bo's in the process of building us a new boat to make it even easier, because we have just been using our boat that we've had forever, and adapted it to carry these, 3,000 pounds of vegetables. But he's creating a newer boat that we won't have to be bending down and awkwardly moving coolers into floats, that will be easier on our bodies, and we'll be able to carry more produce safely to town. So we are still working on making it a smoother, better process in facing the challenges that we face in Farragut.
So now the vast majority of your produce then is going into this town of Petersburg, which is not exactly a metropolis.
Yeah, that's right. Petersburg only has about 3,000 people. It's a pretty small town. And like we said earlier, it's not connected to any other towns by a road system. It's on an island, actually. So there's a small amount of roads around Petersburg, but there's really nowhere to go in your car in Petersburg. You can't drive to the next town. So yeah, we are faced with some challenges of trying to make our living selling to a limited number of people. And we knew that from the beginning, and so took that into consideration as we grew each year. Part of that is keeping a diversity of crops. Some days we think, gosh, it would be so much easier if we could just grow 5 or 6 crops, those that do the best, and sell that and make a living. But 3,000 people, obviously not everyone in town is going to buy our produce, but a limited number of people, it's going to be hard to make it by only growing a limited number of crops. So we've worked to keep diversity so that our customers can buy many different things from us, which really helps, having bigger sales per customer. And we also have, I would say we sell, let's see at the numbers, I think we sell about 3/5 of our income at the market in Petersburg. And then we sell another 1/5 to the tour boats that we talked about. And then another 1/5 of our income comes from wholesale. So that's to restaurants here in town, or the grocery store here in town, the school. We also sell to the school. And we have, over the years, as we've grown, we've started to ship out a little bit of our produce mainly to a grocery store in Juneau, which is north of us, and a grocery store to Wrangell, another small town south of us. But that is air shipped. It goes on an airplane. Alaska Airline flies among all the communities here, and so we bring it up to the airport in boxes, and then it gets shipped to either town. But like I said, the majority of it is staying here in Petersburg, and the majority of it is being sold directly to our customers at that market.
I mean, so Petersburg, a town of about 3,000 people. I was doing some numbers before our interview today and calculating, here in Madison, which is like, the hipness center of local foods, at least here in the upper Midwest. And, we have, I think you could argue that about 10% of Madison's population is a member of a CSA, right? I mean, and that's, and of course, though, we've got a population of 250,000 people. So, 10%, that's a lot of people. That's a lot of vegetables. What percentage of the people in Petersburg are coming and buying your guys' produce?
Yeah, I'd actually say it's pretty close to the same. Our market manager does keep track of our numbers, and generally we're getting about 300 to 400 people who are coming through our market each week. And so in a town of 3,000, that would be about 10%. I mean, our sales, when I look back, I'm doing about 110 to 120 actual sales on average per market. But of course, that represents, if you're looking at a family of 4, it represents more than just one person. So I'd say at least 10% of our town shows up regularly to our market, and maybe even more, including kids, are eating our food at one time or another. We have an incredibly supportive community. I think, when you live in a small town, isolated, there's a certain, we take care of each other. We look out for one another, and we support each other. And we have seen just tremendous support from the people in Petersburg. Everyone is really excited about what we're doing and really interested to have access to fresh, locally grown produce. All the food in the grocery stores is barged up here. So they're used to, generally speaking, the quality isn't that great because by the time it's been shipped from the lower 48 and made the barge trip up to Petersburg and gets out on the shelf, it's been a long time since it was harvested. So they feel very fortunate and know and can see the difference between something that was picked yesterday versus something that was picked 2 weeks ago. So yeah, we've been just super, super supported by our community, and we're really thankful for that.
So tell me about the market where you're selling your produce, because you noted that there's not like a lot of other vegetable farms in your area.
Yeah, that's right. There aren't. And at the market, we are the only quote unquote farmer. Occasionally, someone will bring in some extra kale from their garden or something that they've produced on a home scale, but it's a small market. I'd say there's generally 10 to 20 vendors who show up, and people are selling, baked goods, breads, cookies. Some people make jewelry. It's not just a food market. There also is artisan stuff happening. There's always someone there making something for lunch, Thai food or soup and sandwich, something like that. But yeah, we are the main attraction as far as vegetables go. So, in some ways it's great. We don't have any competition. Everyone who comes to the market looking for vegetables is pretty much going to buy from us. But like you said, in the face of that, we have to do everything we can to get every customer to buy as much as they can in order to move the quantity of produce that we're growing.
Yeah, I guess to add to that, it's been an interesting challenge that is a really good challenge to have. I'm not complaining at all, but we do get like kind of a crowd. There is so much demand for local produce, and we are the only place to get it in any kind of quantity that we get swamped to the point where it's been a challenge. Like Marja spent a lot of time and thought designing a market stand layout that allows us to move people through as rapidly as possible and still like provide them a way to shop without just standing in lines and being herded like cattle. And it's been interesting and really challenging to make an efficient way to serve everyone who wants to be served in the short time, once every 2 weeks, that we're actually available to buy from. Yeah, and it's taken a lot of thought.
Yeah, our market is actually only 3 hours long too. We should throw that in. It's not an all-day thing. It's just 3 hours. So wow. it all gets...
It's compressed. Yeah. So we've done a lot of, or I should say Marja has done a lot of things with just, figuring out a rapid way to check people out. We use iPads.
This is why I deal with that section.
One of those things. We use one of those things for cash registers. We have 2 people checking out. And then we also have a self-checkout station where people can, with another thingy, that people can self-check out. And it all, I don't know what Marja should talk about this, but it's a computer program that tallies all the sales, puts them all one place, categorizes it. We know exactly what was sold and blah, blah, blah. And then we also have like a pre-made bag of vegetables that people can just come in and they don't even have to deal with competing with other people to look at what's there and picking things out. They just grab the bag, throw their money in a box, and walk out for people who want just to get veggies quickly. So we've done a lot of things, just the layout of the stand. It's kind of in a star shaped. So there's a lot of surface area to it. Like we've tried to get is the things are in multiple places. There's 5 tables and they're all spread out in a star shape, and they each have, a little bit of everything on there. So people have access to everything without having to walk through the whole stand. Yeah, it's taken a lot of work just to make that efficient.
But it's been necessary because it came to the point where people were waiting for 45 minutes in line to get through, to come through the stand and pick something out. And we knew we were losing customers because some people would walk in and see a line all the way through the hall and be like, I'm not going to wait in that line just to buy some carrots. So we don't want to lose those customers either. We want to make sure that if you're not someone who wants to sit around and talk with your neighbors while you wait to get your vegetables, that there's options for you to get what you want, get in and get out if that's how you prefer to do it.
Now, how does your pricing compare to the food that comes out from the lower 48? Because my memory of food in Alaska from when I've been up there is that it's really expensive.
Yeah, food is expensive here. People are used to spending a lot more of their budget on food, I would say, than in the lower 48. And our prices, we try to set our prices pretty comparable to the organic offerings at our local grocery store. Maybe a little bit higher in some cases, but usually we're right around that price point. So yeah, our food is not cheap by any means, and that's something that's been in the forefront of our mind as our business has developed, that we obviously need to set a high enough price point that we're making a living. But in doing that, we definitely exclude some of the members of our community who can't afford to buy expensive vegetables. There's a lot of people in our town who just don't buy fresh vegetables because they don't have the expendable income to be able to afford that, whether it's at the grocery store or, say, at the farmer's market. We do the WIC program, so there's a number of mothers in town who can come in and have vouchers throughout the summer to get produce for their kids. We also signed up for the SNAP program years ago, but we didn't really get a lot of takers through that SNAP program, and I think part of it is just having limited food stamps. They might not be able to spend them again on expensive vegetables. So this last year, in a way to try to deal with that issue, we trialed a new program that we called Healthy Food Equals Healthy Families. And we as a farm came to our community and said, hey, we see this as a problem. We think everyone should have access to fresh, healthy vegetables. And in an effort to get there, to start this, we as a farm are going to donate to 4 families this summer a bag of produce every time we come to town. And if you think that's cool and you want to join in, feel free to donate. The more donations we get, the more bags that we'll give away to low-income families here in our community who might not feel comfortable or might not have the money to come and spend it at the market. And it actually worked out really great. We got, again, a lot of support from the community who agreed that it was an issue and wanted to put their money towards solving that issue. And we were able to collect enough donations to get 11 families sponsored throughout the summer. So every time that we came to town, 11 families got to pick up a bag of free produce. And I believe it was 34 kids amongst those families. A lot of families with 3 and 4 kids ended up signing up. So we reached a lot of kiddos here in the community, and a lot of our customers were really excited to be able to contribute to something like that and work towards getting everybody a chance to have, the produce that they really enjoy eating as well.
So you guys are coming to town once every 2 weeks, more or less, and you're doing it over a pretty short season, May until the middle of September. How do you guys stay in touch with your customers? How do you make sure that people know when to show up for market? I think it would be pretty easy to just miss it.
Yeah, definitely. That's super important when you're not, I wish we could be able to be there every Saturday morning because people can remember that and remember to show up for it. But unfortunately, we don't even sell on the same day of the week most of the time. It's changing throughout the summer. So we have to work really hard to get that word out and then to remind people. And we do that a number of ways. Let's see, at the beginning of the season, I always hand out a little piece of paper that's got our schedule on it for people to stick up on their refrigerators so that they've got that in their face throughout the summertime. We also do hang signs around town near the docks is really important in our fishing town. People are up and down from the docks all the time. So we make sure in the high trafficked areas around town, we've got a big poster sign that explains who we are and what we do and when we're in town. And we also maintain a really healthy email list and Facebook presence. Our town is definitely into the Facebook thing. So we try to always do reminder posts about the day before we're coming in, the day of, as well as sending emails saying, hey, just a reminder, we're coming in tomorrow. This is what we're going to have. This is where you can find us. And that has really helped. But I also think just word of mouth is super important in this town. So getting your customers excited enough to talk to their friends and family about you being there is just so valuable. Oh, and we also actually advertise on our local radio station. We've got a great little radio station, KFSK, that has local reporting as well as NPR feed, and we're an underwriter, a sponsor for them. And so we get a little spot on the radio, which everyone in town listens to the radio. So that helps get the word out as well.
So one of the things that you guys commented on early on in the show is that you live a fairly self-reliant lifestyle. I mean, that was pretty obvious from the fact that you're gathering your own fertilizer off of the beach. Tell me a little bit more about the utility setup that you guys have there. I mean, because it takes water to wash crops and you need heat for the greenhouse. And how do you make all of that work when you don't have utility lines coming in from the outside?
Yeah, that's another challenge for sure. Living within an energy budget that all the energy we have, it comes from somehow from what we produce in one way or another. I guess we do buy gas for the outboard motors, but
that's true. That's true.
So we have a solar array and a small windmill, and even in Alaska, especially during the summer, that actually produces quite a bit of electricity and a lot of energy. So that covers stuff like pumping water, charging batteries for our electric tiller, lights. We have a satellite internet connection, which is our communication with the outside world for marketing and all that other stuff, everything else. So that's pretty simple. Like you just stick panels in the sun and you have electricity. That covers that. As far as water, we're collecting water off all the roofs that we have and putting it in storage tanks. We have about 10,000 gallons of water storage now. There's a dedicated tank just for washing in a separate system. So we keep that especially clean and keep that roof really clean and, bleach the tank a couple of times and keep that system really nice and clean. So we're pretty confident that we're not going to get anybody sick. And then we have a bunch of other tanks that are used for irrigation inside of high tunnels that aren't open to the rain. And otherwise, we do put an irrigation system on our carrots for germination, but otherwise we're not watering outside very much at all. We might get an occasional dry spell where we'll run around with a hose just to keep things going. But otherwise, there's enough rain that we don't have to worry about that.
That's one benefit of all that rain.
Yeah. But we don't, we're not running very much on gas besides the outboard motors. Everything else, all of our tools run on electricity that comes from the solar panels. We have an electric lawnmower that we go around all the edges of all the beds and keep things tidy and kind of try and keep the slug habitat down a little bit. We have a couple different electric tillers that we use. And as far as heating, we only really heat one greenhouse, and that's our starts house. And we have a wood stove in there that heats up a big tank of water as a heat sink. But that's pretty simple, too. It's just a wood-fired stove.
one of the things that I think is really cool about farming in Alaska is, everybody else talks about food sovereignty and the importance of local food systems, but man, in Alaska, like local food systems and food sovereignty, like that's a real thing, I mean, it's not like you guys have reliable, easy ways to get things from someplace else. And so last year, it's my understanding you guys hosted the inaugural Southeast Alaska Commercial Growers Conference.
Yeah. It was actually 2 years ago now. We had the idea that it would be really cool to get together anyone else in our region here who is working on commercial food production and share ideas and challenges and just try to get to know, because we're such a spread out region, we just don't have the opportunity really to meet with people who are in other communities or living in other rural places. So we just put the word out as best we could and told people to spread it. And about 35 people showed up here in Petersburg that first Southeast Growers Conference, and it was great. It was so fun to see that there actually were some other folks out there, trying their hand at farming. Again, like we said, there's not much going on here in our region. We're in the very nascent stages of a local food movement. It's not like down in the lower 48. So it was a great opportunity for people to share experiences, and we actually held our second annual one just this last winter in February up in Haines. And the idea is to kind of move that conference around. Every other year, we'll hold it in a different community in Southeast to give people a chance to attend who might not be able to, make the trip. It's pretty expensive to travel around Southeast by ferry or by plane. But yeah, we want to continue that tradition of just getting together people to share in learning, really. There's just not a lot of existing resources about farming here in Southeast, specifically in our climate, in our region. And so we feel the best way to learn is to just talk to everyone else and find out what's working for them, what's not working for them, whether that's farming techniques or even marketing. How are you getting your food to communities that are far away? Are you using the barge? Are you shipping by plane? Are you doing a CSA? Just sharing what works and what doesn't, as we all try to become more refined in our farming techniques and in our marketing techniques. It's been super helpful and just really nice to know that we're not alone out here. Sometimes I think that's true with farmers anywhere. And that's why your podcast is such a great thing, Chris. It gives you a chance to realize that there's other folks out there who are doing what you do and love what you love. And it's nice to hear their stories.
Yeah, the first one was 30 people. And the one in Haines was, 90 people?
Yeah, it was 85, 86 people showed up. So it really did grow over the course of 2 years.
Yeah. The first one was very different from the second conference. The first conference was really homegrown, and me and Marja just kind of threw it together. And all the presenters were just local people who put together, local farmers or people who wanted to farm or whatever, who put together little presentations. It was really intimate, and, we cooked the big meals together, and everybody really got to know each other. And the second one kind of exploded, and we had presenters from outside the region, and a farmer came down from the interior. It was a big event, a big catered event, and it was amazing. I mean, it really felt like a real conference. And I think everyone got a lot out of it. And it was frenetic. Just all these people who never get to see anybody else who's growing got together. We already all, knew each other a little bit from the first conference. And we were pretty exhausted after frantically socializing for 4 days or whatever it was. And the other thing that's kind of interesting that's happening now is a group of us are going to be going down to the Moses conference this spring, spring. So you're going to see a bunch of really pale, pasty
Alaskan
people
farmers
walking around in a self-conscious group because we don't get to talk to any other farmers.
It's Wisconsin and it's farmers. So, we're pasty and don't really talk much either.
We're pastier than you are.
We'll try to fit in.
Probably. So, all right. With that, we're going to turn to our lightning round after we get a quick word from one more sponsor. This lightning round in particular, and perennial support for the Farmer to Farmer podcast in general, is provided by Vermont Compost Company, makers of living potting soils for organic growers since 1992. In addition to being excellent physical products that grow amazing transplants year after year, Vermont Compost potting soils are an embodiment of the best of the art and the science of potting soils. Seriously, would you rather eat bread or drink beer rooted in a place, made with a deep tradition and respect? Or would you rather eat bread and drink beer that's the product of the most reductionist of modern science, which gave us sliced white bread in plastic bags and the most unpalatable military-industrial beer? And would you rather use potting soils based on that same reductionist science that require the daily infusion of liquid fertilizers? Or would you like to use potting soils based on living compost and the best ingredients designed to bring a rich diversity of biology into your greenhouse planting trays and your soil blocks? I know what I like, and that's why I would encourage you to take advantage of Vermont Compost Company's fall pre-buy program to help you get what your plants need at the best price with the best shipping options. Don't miss out. Vermont Compost fall pre-buy program runs through December 21st. VermontCompost.com. Bo, what's your favorite tool on the farm?
I don't know if it really classifies as a tool, but my favorite tool or piece of equipment, whatever you want to call it, is our boat, the Ouzel. It's a catamaran sailboat, 27 feet long. It's about 12 feet wide, and there's a lot of deck space and open hulls where you can fit a lot of coolers. And I originally bought it as just a way to get back and forth to town, and it has turned out to be almost ideal for transporting vegetables. I mean, it's not ideal, but it has worked for years, and it's carried everything from carrots to sawmills, and it always gets us home.
It's an amazing boat.
It just sounds so much cooler than having a box truck, Marja, what's your favorite tool on the farm?
I'd have to say I'm not a big tool person. I think hands have been amazingly engineered, and it's hard to make a tool that's better than your hands. But if I had to choose, I would say probably the carts that Bo has made us, these big flat top carts that have sort of bicycle wheels, and we can use them for transporting amendments, sometimes as like portable tables for workspaces, for jobs you might need to do. It makes moving coolers so much easier around the farm and other heavy things. They're just awesome. I like the flat top carts.
And Marja, what's your favorite crop to grow?
I would have to go with the lowly cabbage. I love cabbages. They're just humble and they're beautiful, and they actually like growing here, which many things don't. So I would pick cabbages as my favorite vegetable to grow here.
And Bo, do you have a favorite vegetable to grow?
Yeah, garlic. Partly because we can be almost totally self-contained with it. Once we got our seed stock up, we can plant back our own seed stock, and it's just a really rewarding, durable. It stores really well. We can keep it. We don't have to rush it to town and sell it.
Bo, if you could go back in time and tell your beginning farmer self one thing, what would it be?
I was thinking about this, and when you think of like metal, it has so many fatigue cycles before it breaks. Our backs are the same way. And I'm no spring chicken anymore. And if I could have told myself when I was 18 to 30 or whatever that the health of my back was finite, that would have been really good advice. Just, you can only bend over so many times before it really starts to hurt. So do everything smart from the beginning. And if you don't have your physical health, you really don't have much, and especially farming.
Marja, how about you? If you could go back in time and tell your beginning farmer self one thing, what would you say?
Well, it hasn't been all that long since we haven't been at it all that long. But I think I would tell myself to, once I figured out that this is really what we were doing and we were going to try to make this farming thing work, to take some time out to go and check out what other farmers were doing, farmers who at least were doing something similar to what we were shooting for. I think, we came into this pretty green with not a lot of agricultural knowledge, and we learned a lot of lessons the hard way that maybe could have been prevented by just spending some time on other farms and getting some great ideas and learning some lessons from folks who've been doing it for a long time.
Marja and Bo, thank you so much for making time today to be part of the Farmer to Farmer podcast.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
And
it was
thanks
fun.
again for what you do. We love Farmer to Farmer podcast. It's nice to hear what's going on down in the lower 48.
Thank you. All right, so wrapping things up here, I'll say again that this is episode 144 of the Farmer to Farmer podcast, and you can find the notes for the show at farmertofarmerpodcast.com by looking on the episodes page or just searching for Farragut. That's Farragut. The transcript for this episode is brought to you by Earth Tools, offering the most complete selection of walk-behind farming equipment and high-quality garden tools in North America. And by Osborne Quality Seeds, a dedicated partner for growers. Visit osborneseed.com for high-quality seed, industry-leading customer service, and fast order fulfillment. And by CoolBot, allowing you to build an affordable walk-in cooler powered by a window air conditioning unit. Save $20 on your CoolBot when you visit farmertofarmerpodcast.com/CoolBot. Additional funding for transcripts is provided by North Central SARE, providing grants and education to advance innovations in sustainable agriculture. You can get the show notes for every Farmer to Farmer podcast right in your inbox just by signing up for my email newsletter at farmertofarmerpodcast.com. Also, please head on over to iTunes and leave us a review if you enjoy the show, or talk to us in the show notes, or tell your friends on Facebook. We're at Purple Pitchfork on Facebook. And hey, when you talk to our sponsors, please let them know how much you appreciate their support of a resource you value. You can support the show directly by going to farmertofarmerpodcast.com/donate. I'm working to make the best farming podcast in the world, and you can help. Finally, please let me know who you would like to hear from on the show through the suggestions form at farmertofarmerpodcast.com. I will do my best to get them on the show. Thank you for listening. Be safe out there and keep the tractor running.